Hello friends, I welcome you in this session. In this session, I am going to discuss very crucial topic which is in news these days. The economists are saying that India is going through a great economic slowdown. And our own chief economic advisor, the ex-chief economic advisor, Mr. Arvind Subramaniam, he published in a paper that India is going through a great Indian economic slowdown. And India is moving from twin balance sheet crisis to the four balance sheet crisis. Now we will discuss each of these terms and we will see how India has been moving through a high growth rate in 2008-9 to a very low growth rate at present. So we will see the entire journey. This discussion is based upon the news from different newspapers. So what will be the coverage of this session? The coverage will be, first, what is the fundamental equation of national income calculation? What is the twin balance sheet crisis? Why India kept growing despite the global financial crisis which happened in 2008. Then what kept the Indian economy going after 2014 till 2018. Why Indian economy has been slowing down in the recent time. Why NBFC sector has been faltering. Why real estate sector has been faltering. And what is the issue and what needs to be done. So we will discuss each one of these aspects. So first of all, when we say economic slowdown, what does this mean? So economic slowdown, this is slowdown. That means reduction in the GDP growth rate. Right? I am not saying negative economic growth rate. I am saying reduction in the economic growth rate. So if earlier the economic growth rate was 8% and now this growth rate is 4% and this continues over a certain period. This continues over a certain period, say for example 3 quarters, then it is called slowdown. So the speed of the economic growth has been slowing down. That is why this is called slowdown. This is not depression. This is not depression. This is slowdown. So now, this slowdown, how do we calculate? We calculate based upon the GDP growth rate, right? And GDP growth rate is based upon the national income or the GDP, the national income of the GDP. And how do we calculate national income? The national income can be calculated in 3 ways or 3 methods. So it can be based upon the output method or income method, or it can be based upon the expenditure method, right? So these are the 3 methods upon which the national income can be calculated. So this expenditure method, if we see this expenditure method, right, we will discuss this expenditure method. In this expenditure method, the national income can be calculated by adding the expenditure part, that is the consumption by the private individuals, which is called C. C means consumption by the private households. Then second part is G. G means the expenditure of the government, the government final consumption expenditure, the consumption expenditure of the government. Then third is I. I means investment by the firms or the government. And last one is the net effect of exports. That is, we will add the imports and we will reduce the export, right? So the point is that this equation gives us the total value of national income. So the change in the national income will depend upon either of these factors. So it is possible that at times this consumption is decreasing, the government consumption is also decreasing, but investment is increasing and the net exports is increasing. So the value of national income will be almost stable. In another situation, it is possible that this consumption is increasing, the government consumption is also increasing, but investment is declining and exports are also declining. In this situation also, the national income will always remain same. It will be like stable. It will not go down immediately. So this interplay of these four factors actually decides how much is going to be the growth rate. And now we will see how the interplay of these four factors has been impacting the India's GDP growth rate in the last 10 years. That history now we will see. So let us see this equation. So this equation says C plus G plus I plus NX. So these are the four drivers which determine the country's GDP. C means for the consumption by the private individuals. Then G means the expenditure done by the government, and then investment for I, and net effect of import and export is represented by the NX. Now let us see how India got the twin balance sheet crisis, right? So if we start from if we see the origin of twin balance sheet crisis, or this is also called as TBS, right? So in 2005 the economic growth rate was very high, right? In India, the country was growing at a very high GDP growth rate, and this picture continued till 2009. So there was rosy prospects, and when the situation is good, then everyone takes good decisions, like the decisions they take in the fast manner. So in this time, the companies as well as the banks, they involved into lot of borrowing. So the banks kept giving the loan to the companies, thinking that the company will be repaying the loan because the economy is growing at a very good growth rate, and company will be earning lots of profit. And most of these companies, they were in the steel sector, power sector, and the other infrastructure sectors. So these companies took lots of loan. But in 2008, the USA crisis happened, and because of this crisis, the global financial crisis started. And this global financial crisis, it had an impact over the entire world, including India. So if we see the equation C plus G plus I plus NX, out of this NX or the exports, it went down. Why it went down? Because clearly when the global scenario is of crisis, then demand will be less. When the demand is less, the exports will be less. So overall, the net exports went down. Right? Secondly, the investments also came down. Why the investments came down? Because the foreign capital is also not coming into India, and because of the crisis, the banks are also hesitant to give loan to the companies. Right? So this investment and net export, it came down. However, the good thing was that this consumption and government expenditure, it was high. It kept growing because on the one hand, the government was giving fiscal stimulus. The government was providing many benefits to the citizens so that they can come out of the global crisis. They can come out of the impact of the economic slowdown. So this government expenditure was increasing. At the same time, the private consumption was also increasing, because although the global financial crisis was there, but India's banks were not much impacted. They were not much impacted because the Indian banks, they were supported by the government. So there was always a guarantee that nothing can happen to this bank because the government will always provide the support. So even banks were stable. The banks in the USA, they were crying, they were falling down, but the banks in India, they were survived. And they also kept giving loan to the companies to a certain extent, so that the companies can also come out of the crisis and can repay the loan. So in the hope of coming out of the slowdown, the companies were getting the loan from the bank. So this C and G were high. Therefore, even though there was a global financial crisis, still in India, this national income was not impacted much and GDP growth rate remained very stable. Right? So what was the twin balance sheet crisis? This twin balance sheet crisis, this is also called as TBS 1 because this is the first phase, right? And this was identified by the Economic Survey of 2017 by the then Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramaniam, and he identified that India has been in the twin balance sheet crisis. Twin balance sheet means first the balance sheet of the banks, right? So balance sheet of the banks, especially the public sector banks or the government owned banks and the corporate sector. So for the bank, it means high NPAs. The customers are not able to repay the loan. And for the corporates, it means over borrowing and not able to repay the loan, right? So this origin happened between 2005 and 2009 because of the economic prospects. As we have already seen, the banks, they ignored the prudential norms, they ignored the rules and regulations, hoping that because of the good economic growth, everything will be fine. The global financial crisis happened, and finally the companies were not able to pay back, and which resulted into the bad debt situation, the NPA crisis. But good thing was that neither the Indian companies nor the banks, they were, the bad thing was that neither the Indian companies were in a position to invest nor the Indian banks were in a position to lend. So why did Indian economy continue to grow? Because first of all, I was down, as we have already seen. The NX was also down, but unlike the developed countries, in India, both the companies and the banks survived. So there was no risk, not much risk, because the government was supporting them. The companies were getting the help, and there was a robust demand from the C and G, right? So all these things we have discussed. Now, this situation happened till 2013. Till 2013, because of the good consumption and the government expenditure, the situation was good. After 2014, especially in 2015 and 16, the Indian economy got the boost because of the falling crude oil prices. Because of the fall in the crude oil prices, the impact was that the people had more money to spend. And now, when they have more money to spend, that means the C will increase, right? So the C component, the private consumption component, increased. So this was the reason why in 2015-16 the economic growth rate not came down much. Then in 2017 and 18 there was rupee depreciation, and the rupee depreciation or fall in the external value of the Indian rupee, it helps the exports, and because of this help in the export, the NX component also increased. So the net impact of the exports also increased. So this resulted into the NX component being high, right? And at this time the world demand was also high. Then the third reason, so first reason was this crude oil price decrease. Second reason was the rupee depreciation. The third reason was that the government expenditure was also increasing, the G part, right? This government expenditure increased not in the direct expenditure but in the indirect channels. For example, with the help of FCI and with the help of NHAI, right? So these are the off budget items and not directly reflected in the fiscal deficit target, right? So even the fiscal deficit was under control because these items were not part of the fiscal expenditure, right? They were off budget item, right? So they were kept, they are off budget item, therefore they were not reflected in the fiscal deficit. So fiscal deficit was under control, still the government was expending huge amount, right? And fourth, even though the banks were in the crisis, the banks were facing the NPA problem, but NBFCs, the non-banking financial companies, they were increasing the lending, right? So they were increasing the lending, therefore because of this increased lending, the C as well as I, it also kept growing. So we can see C is growing, NX is growing, I is growing, G is growing. So all the components are growing. So there was a high economic growth rate because of all these factors, right? There was high growth rate because of all these factors. So we can see there was sharp fall in the crude oil prices. Because of that, the C kept growing. Then NX also kept growing because of the world demand increasing and rupee depreciation. Then G component kept growing because of certain indirect expenditure done by the government through the FCI and the NHAI. Then NBFC started lending, for example, the ILNFS and the DHFL, and these NBFCs were lending mostly to the real estate sector, right? Now, what problem was there after 2018, right? Why the economy got derailed despite it regaining the speed in 2016-17. So post 2018, the problem started in the September 18 when this ILNFS crisis started. This ILNFS company was having the 19,000 crore debt, rupees 90,000 crore debt given to the market, and this company fell down, right? So this 90,000 crore means a huge amount. This amount was not being repaid to the its investors also. So and after that, the government started focusing upon the NBFC regulation, and there was many other NBFCs. They also started facing crisis. For example, the DHFL, right? And most of these NBFCs, ILNFS or DHFL, they were lending to which sector? To the real estate sector, right? And these NBFCs, they came into problem because of the problem in the real estate sector. And why this real estate sector went into problem? This real estate sector get into problem because first in 2016 there was demonetization. So because of this demonetization, the black money was gone, and black money is supposed to be one of the major driver of the real estate. And apart from that, also the global factors also impact. So overall, the demand for the houses, it came down till June 2019. In the June 2019, the situation was that the 10 lakh units were unsold in 8 top cities in India, and annual demand is just 2 lakh unit. So annual demand is just 2 lakh unit and unsold inventory is 10 lakh. That means there's huge unsold inventory in India. And because of this, the real estate sector is in crisis. And when the real estate sector is in crisis, that means it impacts around 50 more sectors. This real estate sector is interlinked to, it is providing the backward forward linkages to the many other sector, to the primary sector like mining, energy, steel, power, right? As well as to the forward sector, the like interior designing, finance, HR, look, all these sectors. The service sector is also getting a lot of work from the real estate sector, and when the real estate sector is down, it impacts the entire economy, right? So after the real estate crisis down, the NBFCs also started facing this problem. So this is the reason why this balance sheet crisis became the 4 balance sheet crisis. That means earlier it was